Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma Vandamuni Savadana Mate Vandamuni Savadana Mate Vandamuni Savadana Mate Yahara Prasade Vai Bhavatoriya Jai Yahara Prasade Vai Bhavatoriya Jai Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Koribo Aikya Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Koribo Aikya Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati Ya Prasad Pure Sarvo Asha Prasad Pure Sarvo Asha Chakshudan dilo e janme janme Prabhu se Chakshudan dilo e janme janme Prabhu se Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashito Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashito Prema Bhakti Aha Hoite Avidya Vinasha Jate Prema Bhakti Aha Hoite Avidya Vinasha Jate Vedagaya Hara Charito Vedagaya Hara Charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu Lokena Lokera Jivana Lokena Lokera Jivana Ha Prabhu Koro Dayo Deha Mohi Padachayo Ha Prabhu Koro Dayo Deha Mohi Padachayo Ebesha Gupshukti Bhuvana एवेश भुक्षते भुवाना प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना गुरुदेव पतित पवाना जय प्रभुपदा 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 जय प्रभुपदा जय गुरुदेवा 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 जय गुरुदेवा नमः विष्णुपदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांता स्वामी नित्य नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादिशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Gaura Hari Jaya Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Gaura Hari Jaya Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Nitya Sacinandana Gaura Hari Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Gaura Hari Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Nitya Gaura Chanda Jaya Gaura Hari Jaya 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 Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol Jai Ram Vishnu Pada Brahmsa Parvijacharya Sata Sata Shrimad Bhakti A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Ram Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parvijacharya Sata Shrimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Sadhu Gaur Bhattacharya Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Radhakunda Shyamakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai वृंदावन धाम की जय मधुरा धाम की जय मायापुर धाम की जय पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय गंगा मैया यमुना की जय भक्ति देवी तुलसी देवी की जय कलियुग पावन हर नाम संकीर्तन की जय श्यामा वेद भक्त वृंद की जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंद हरि बोल जय राधा माधव जय कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव जय कुंज बिहारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभ जय गिरिवरधारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभ जय गिरिवरधारी जय यशोदनंदन जय ब्रज जन रंजन जय Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Nitya Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gaur Hari Bol Nitya Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Shikhar. Yeah, yes, please here. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Shikhar. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. So we can go ahead and get started, Narottam Das Prabhu.
Yes, Roji, please.
Okay, so I'll share screen. You can see that, yes? The,
Yes, Roji.
Mangal Charan prayers.
Yes.
What do you think? Should I start or should I wait? I know people usually filter in not exactly at 8. So,
Whenever you type Prabhuji.
huh?
Whenever you feel it's right, Prabhu.
Okay. I had sent a message to you, Prabhu, about, since temple program, it starts at 11 a.m. You're scheduled to give lecture today at 11:30.
Oh, so I haven't looked at my phone at all.
Pardon me?
I haven't looked at my phone at all. Definitely, Prabhu, I'll come to temple, Prabhu.
Does that work? I know you're busy with the baby, but does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. How are you guys doing? You guys are doing okay otherwise?
So, Krishna's mercy.
You're back to physical work now?
Yes.
Do you have to go to Intel or you do virtual?
At home, Prabhu. From home.
Virtual? Yeah. Okay. And Mataji's back to her accounting job in like this week ago, virtually?
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like Poonam Mataji is Hare Krishna. Poonam Mataji. Please accept my humble obeisance. Lord Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Krishna. So I know you like the Mangal Charan prayers a lot. Do you feel comfortable reciting them? I have it displayed here.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. I can scroll down or you can just read from your Bhagavad Gita.
Sure.
So you can go ahead and start, Mataji.
Okay. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishnesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Shri Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Parmami Hari Priye Vancha kalpadribhasya kripa sindhuve evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Thank you very much.
Jai.
Thank you very much, Mataji. I heard somebody else chanting in the background. Was that your family member?
No, Prabhuji, just me today.
Okay. So do you recite these prayers every day?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Very nice. Srila Prabhupada taught us that these are complete in that one is offering obeisances and seeking blessings of all the Vaishnava Acharyas, Chief Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srimati Radharani, Lord Krishna himself, and the spiritual master. So very complete set of prayers. Thank you very much for chanting so nicely. Welcome, Ravi Prabhu. I hope you and your family are doing well as well.
So, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So you guys can see my screen, yes? The verse itself. Correct?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So last week, this is a continuation of the previous verse, and I'll try to connect my comments. So it's the setting is Bhishma Dev lying on his bed of arrows. And through the blessings of Lord Krishna, where Lord Krishna gave him the opportunity to stand the bodily discomforts of being pierced by all these arrows, and the mental disturbance as well that occurs from such a situation, gave him the a peaceful situation and clarity of mind. Lord Krishna told Bhishma Dev that I will benedict you with this so that you can fully do the needful and explain to Yudhishthira Maharaj the duties of a king. So Bhishma Dev, having taken shelter of Lord Krishna, goes and speaks these things, like us taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada before we speaking Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namaskritam Naramcha Eva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayadudire Shinutha Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hirdontasto Patrani Vidnuti Sutsatam Nashtaprayashu Apadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Namo Vishwabadaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Shesha Shunyavadi Paschataya Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Dhana dharmam, raja dharmam, moksha dharmam, vibhakasha, stri dharman, bhagavad dharman, samasya vyasa yogataha. Dhana dharmam, raja dharmam, moksha dharmam, vibhakasha, stri dharman, bhagavad dharman, samasya vyasa yogataha. Dhana dharman, raja dharman, moksha dharman, vibhakasha, bhagavad dharman, samasya Samasavyasa yogataha. Somebody like to repeat?
Dharma dharman, raja dharman, moksha dharman, vibhagashaha, stri dharman, bhagavad dharman, samasa vyasa yogataha.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. How about you, Ravi Prabhu and Punamataji?
Sure. Dana Dharman, Raja Dharman, Moksha Dharman, Vibhagasha, Sri Dharman, Bhagavad Dharman, Samasa Vyasa, Yogataha.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Dhana dharma, raja dharma, moksha dharma, vibhagasha, stri dharman, bhagavat dharma, samasa, vyasa yogata.
Thank you very much, Mataji. So, Dhana Dharman, the acts of charity, Raja Dharman, pragmatic activities of the king, Moksha Dharma, the acts for salvation, Vibhagasha, by divisions, Stri Dharman, duties of women, Bhagavad Dharma, the act of the devotees, Samasa, generally, Vyasa, explicitly, Yogataha, by means of. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai. He, meaning Bhishma Dev, by divisions, acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees both briefly and extensively. So pretty comprehensive description by Bhishma Dev over the 54 days that he spent in explaining this to Yudhishthira Maharaj. Purport is also very comprehensive and thorough. I will pick certain points and try to give a global point of view, but emphasize certain things. Srila Prabhupada says a lot of wonderful things in this purport. I'll focus on some. To give charity is one of the householder's main functions, and he should be prepared to give in charity at least 50% of his hard-earned money. Or student should perform sacrifices. A householder should give charity. A person in retired life or in renounced order should practice penances and austerities. We just had the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur on Friday, and he was a householder, a grihastha, but a very elevated acharya. And he said that a duty of a householder is to give charity, and would describe it as follows: that when one is honoring prasadam, one should open up one's doors and shout out that prasadam is being served, please come and honor prasadam. Kind of honoring the sacrifice that a householder does, which is giving charity to maintain the other ashrams, because those ashrams are not working for worldly maintenance. Grihastha and Brahmachari, Vanaprastha, or Sannyasa ashram. Those are the general functions of all the ashrams or orders of life on path of self-realization. Notice the statement, path of self-realization. In the Brahmachari life, the training is sufficiently imparted so that one may understand that the world as property belongs to the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead. No one therefore can claim to be the proprietor of anything in the world. Therefore, in the life of a householder, which is sort of licensed for sense enjoyment, one must give in charity for the service of the Lord. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Therefore, the resultant actions of such energy must be given to the Lord in the shape of transcendental loving service for him. So Srila Prabhupada will oftentimes come up with these amazing, will describe these amazing global understandings of Siddhanta or knowledge in a very precise way. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Therefore, the resultant actions of such energy must be given back to the Lord in the shape of transcendental loving service for him. As the rivers draw water from the sea through the clouds and again down to the sea, similarly our energy is borrowed from the supreme source, the Lord's energy, and must return to the Lord. That is the perfect energy. The Lord, therefore, in Bhagavad Gita 9.27, does anybody know this verse, says that whatever we do, whatever we undergo as penance, whatever we sacrifice, whatever we eat, or whatever we give in charity must be offered to him, the Lord. Does anybody know this verse? So,
Yet the
yes, very good. That is the way of utilizing our borrowed energy. When our energy is utilized in that way, our energy is purified from the contamination of material inebrities, and thus we become fit for our original nature of life of service to the Lord. Notice he says our original nature life, our original natural life of service to the Lord. Meaning that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his book, The Teachings and Precepts of Lord Sri Chaitanya, which he sent out to the entire world, which was the first Vaishnava literature that was distributed to the Western world, it has a very wonderful sentence at the end of that book saying, please understand that you are a foreigner in the foreign land and be prepared to go back to your natural home, which is Golok Vrindavan. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is referencing here, that we must become fit for our original natural life of service to the Lord. Going on, Srila Prabhupada says, Raja Dharma is a great science. Unlike modern diplomacy for political supremacy, the kings were trained systematically to become munificent and not merely be tax collectors. They were trained to perform different sacrifices only for the prosperity of the subjects. To lead the prajas to the attainment of salvation was a great duty of the king. So I'm going to explore this more in the discussion. The father, the spiritual master, and the king are not to become irresponsible in the matter of leading their subjects to the path of ultimate liberation from birth, death, diseases, and old age. When these primary duties are properly discharged, there's no need of government of the people by the people. Does anybody know where that statement, government of the people by the people, came from? It came from a very famous speech.
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, yes. He gave this amazing speech that was very foundational in American political system of governance at the battlefield of Gettysburg, where many soldiers from what was called the North, the Union Army, and many soldiers from the South, called the Confederate Army, they were divided over the idea of should slavery be allowed of African American bodied jivas. So there needed to be a lot of healing because of the sheer number of people that died. Millions of men died in that Civil War. So he talked about governance, and he said, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is saying. When these primary duties of a ruler are properly discharged, there's no need of such government of the people, by the people. In the modern, and he explains why. He says, in the modern days, the people generally occupy the administration by strength of manipulated votes. And you can kind of see that in the current political system here where we live. But they're never trained in the primary duties of the king. And that is also not possible for everyone, meaning that not everyone can have, be practicing Raja Dharma. And we'll explore that. Under the circumstances, the untrained administrators play havoc to make the subjects happy in all respects. And I think you've seen that in the recent elections in this country and elsewhere. On the other hand, these untrained administrators gradually become thieves and increase the taxation to finance a top-heavy administration that is useless for all purposes. Actually, the qualified brahmanas are meant to give direction to the kings for proper administration in terms of scriptures like the Manu Samhita and the Dharma Shastras of Prashad. So he's talking about having advisors that are actually qualified to help in governance. And in the olden days, those advisors were brahmanas. And now you can see that that's absent in current systems of governance in essentially every country in this world. A typical king is the ideal of people in general. And if the king is pious, religious, chivalrous, and munificent, the citizens generally follow him. Such a king is not a lazy, sensuous person living at the cost of the subjects, but alert always to kill thieves and dacoits. The pious kings were not merciful to dacoits and thieves in the name of nonsensical ahimsa, non-violence. Even in Bhagavad Gita, we know in Bhagavad Gita that non-violence was not recommended by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, and likewise, Srila Prabhupada is making the point that the king has to also be cognizant of this. The thieves and dacoits were punished in an exemplary way so that in the future, they commit such nuisances in an organized form. He's talking about these gangs and those collection of people were just causing disturbance. Such thieves and dacoits were never meant for administration as they are now. The taxation law was simple. There was no force, no encroachment. The king had a right to take 1/4 of the production made by the subject. You can all see how complicated our tax laws are. You need manuals upon manuals, and you need wonderful advanced experienced jivas like Premrupa Madhavi Mataji, accountants who know all the laws of the government in order to get through the tax laws. But he's making the point that in the older days, the king had a right to take 1/4 of the production made by the subject. Right to claim 1/4 of one's allotted wealth. This was, I don't know, do any of you know why during the Mughal rulership, all these amazing palaces, etc., were built? Does anybody know why?
Because I think they had charged too much money from the people as in terms of taxation, including the hair tax and things like that.
I'm sure they did. They were not merciful rulers, like you mentioned. But the reason was that the Mughal system of rulership was that whatever money or wealth you had accumulated, you had to use it up in your lifetime. You couldn't, carry it with you or distribute it. Now, of course, at the level of the kings, they definitely forwarded it to their heirs, right? Their sons became rulers and they inherited vast, unfairly gained, wealth. But for the rest of the population under their rulership, you could not take it with you. You could not forward it to your children. You had to use it up. So, that was an extreme example of this case. And of course, they were not looking at being a beneficial, governance. So going on with Srila, a grudge parting with it, meaning wealth, because due to the pious king and religious harmony, there's enough natural wealth, namely grains, fruit, flowers, silk, cotton, milk, jewels, minerals, etc. And therefore, no one was materially unhappy. The citizens were rich in agriculture and animal husbandry. You guys know what animal husbandry means? It means, taking care of cows, etc., horses, etc. And therefore, they had enough grains, fruits, and milk without any artificial need of soaps, toilets, cinemas, and bars. The king had to see that the reserved energy, coming back to that concept of energy, reserved energy of humanity was properly utilized. Human energy is meant not exactly for fulfilling animal propensities, but for self-realization. The whole government was specifically designed to fulfill this particular purpose. As such, the king had to select properly the cabinet ministers, but not on the strength of voting background. The ministers, the military commanders, even the ordinary soldiers were all selected by personal qualification, and the king had to supervise them properly before they were appointed to their respective posts. The king was especially vigilant to see that the tapasvis, or persons who sacrificed everything for disseminating spiritual knowledge, were never disregarded. Srila Prabhupada put this in highlight or in italics for emphasis. The king knew well that the Supreme Personality of Godhead never tolerates any insult to his unalloyed devotees. So Krishna himself says in Gita to Arjuna, declared boldly that my devotee never perishes. Such tapasvis were trusted leaders, even of rogues and thieves, who would never disobey the orders of tapasvis. The king would give special protection to illiterates, the helpless, and the widows of the state. Defense measures were arranged previous to any attack by the enemies. The taxing process was easy, and it was not meant for squandering, but was for strengthening the reserve fund. The soldiers were recruited from all parts of the world, and they were trained for special duties. As far as salvation is concerned, one has to conquer the principles of lust, anger, unlawful desires, avarice. Avarice means greed and bewilderment. To get freedom from anger, one should learn how to forgive. So, this is like a traditional Vedic teaching that if there's within us undesirable tendency, then one should practice the opposite. Like to get free from anger, you should forgive. To get free from envy, you should serve, like that. To be free from unlawful desires, one should not make plans. By spiritual culture, one is able to conquer sleep. By tolerance only can one conquer desires and avarice. Disturbances from various diseases can be avoided by regulated diet. By self-control, one can be free from false hopes, and money can be saved by avoiding desirable association. By practice of yoga, one can control hunger, and worldliness can be avoided by culturing the knowledge of impermanence. Dizziness can be conquered by rising up, and false arguments can be conquered by factual ascertainment. Talkativeness can be avoided by gravity. So and silence. So see if there's something one doesn't like within oneself, then doing the opposite. If one is too talkative, then silence. And by prowess, one can avoid fearfulness. Perfect knowledge can be obtained by self-cultivation. One must be free from lust, avarice, anger, dreaming, etc. to actually attain the path of salvation. As far as the women class are concerned, they are accepted as power of inspiration for men. As such, women are more powerful than men. Mighty Julius Caesar was conquered by Cleopatra. You guys know about this pastime of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra? Yes? So the ruler of Rome generally is called Caesar. He's the ruler of Rome. And this started by a particular ruler by the name of Julius Caesar. His name was Julius. And then his title was Caesar. And then subsequent rulers that came after him, they also went by Caesar, something Caesar. So he was the ruler of Rome, which at that time was controlling most of Europe, like Germany, England, France, etc. Pretty widespread control. And eventually they came into Egypt, and there was some interaction with the Egyptians, but ultimately he was influenced very much by the queen of Egypt, whose name was Cleopatra. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is referencing. Mighty Julius Caesar was controlled by a Cleopatra. Such powerful women are controlled by shyness. Therefore, shyness is important for women. Once this control valve is loosened, women can create havoc in society by adultery. Adultery means production of unwanted children, just as Varna Shankara. So where have you heard this word, Varna Shankara? Does anybody know?
In Bhagavad Gita chapter 1, I think Arjuna is talking about if I do the war, then all the women become this, and then Varna Shankara happens and things like that.
That's right. That's right. Unwanted children, uncared for children who disturb the world. The last item taught by Bhishma Dev was the process of pleasing the Lord. We're all eternal servants of the Lord, and when we forget this essential part of our nature, we're put into material conditions of life. The simple process of pleasing the Lord for householders especially is to install the deity of the Lord at home. So Srila Prabhupada talks about the importance of deity worship for grihasthas in many places. And specifically, Srila Prabhupada stated, I remember once when I asked my spiritual master, His Holiness Prabhupada Swami Maharaj, about deity worship or having deities at home. This was a long time ago. He explained to me that Srila Prabhupada's actual instruction was that the deities of the temple are one's deities. So he explained that the instruction in the early days of ISKCON was, you take pictures of the deities and you put them at your home and you serve them, the temple deities. And in your free time, you go to the temple and you serve the temple. It's practical in that way temple worship is maintained. And it's also, it creates attachment for the deities of the temple. So by concentrating on the deity, one may progressively go on with daily worshiping the deity at home. So he's pointing out that deity worship helps grihasthas become regulated because everything at home centers around worshiping the Lord. Worshiping the deity at home, serving the devotee, hearing Bhagavatam, residing in holy place and chanting the holy name of the Lord. So this is reference to what? What are these? The worshiping deity, serving devotee, hearing Bhagavatam, residing in holy place, chanting the holy name. Has anybody seen this before?
To the 5 potent limbs of bhakti.
Yes. So, these are, Sri Rupa Goswami describes this in Nectar of Devotion, that these are the most potent limbs or angas of bhakti are all inexpensive items by which one can please the Lord. That thus the subject matter was explained by the grandfather, Bhishma Dev, to his Yudhishthira and his brothers. Dhana dharmam, raja dharmam, moksha dharmam, vibhakasha, stri dharmam, bhagavad dharmam, samasya vyasa yogataha. He, Bhishma Dev, then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees both briefly and extensively. Om Agyantimarandasya Jananjana Shlakaya Chakshana Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So a pretty long purport for a very, in one verse here, it's being described what Bhishma Dev said for 54 days. So it's a capsulization. And even when I looked over the Mahabharata, it's summarized in the same manner. So here last week, Urmila Mataji covered, and this verse 26, at Maharaj Yudhishthira's inquiry, Bhishma Dev first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of individual qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold division, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. So described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. So I wanted to explore that a little bit in the context of current verse as well. So here are some general ideas. The Varnashram system is created by God, Krishna, and we'll explore that verse in a minute. It'll always, because it was created by the Lord, it'll always exist, either in an elevated form, as was the purpose of the creation of that Varnashram system, or in a degraded form. In the degraded form, it's called the caste system. But the fundamental point is it cannot be extinguished. You can see that even nowadays, like there are the laborers, even in the US, there's those that do labor and those who do governance, right? So as much as in the West, they talk about the evils of the caste system, and certainly as it's currently practiced, it is degraded from the Varnashram system. But because this process was created by the Lord himself, it has to be followed one way or another. And you can see that in Western society and in India and other societies. So this conception of the four castes, four orders, the four varnas and the four ashrams is planned by the Lord. And we'll go over that verse. That's this one here. So, and its purpose, like Srila Prabhupada explained in this verse that we read and the prior verse in 26, is to actually try to accelerate devotional qualities or transcendental qualities the public in general, so that they may gradually get what Srila Prabhupada described as self-realization, one's knowledge of one's spiritual identity, and with the whole idea of this statement of detachment from matter, but specifically detachment from materially conditioned life. So the Varnashram system emphasizes here, if you read this, Chatu Varnyam Maya Shristam Guna Karma Vigahasha Tasya Kartaram Apimam Vidhi Aktaram Avyayam. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I'm the creator of the system, you should know that I'm yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So Varnashram system is emphasizing quality and work, guna karma. It's not emphasizing birth. People are put into categories in the system according to their qualification, not the family one is born into. Certainly it is true that one's birth may facilitate a particular varna and ashram, but it's not the sole determination of one's ultimate varna ashram. So the varnas, it's a compound word, varna ashram, varna and ashram. So and this verse 4.13 is specifically talking about varna. So the varnas are classification of different occupations, essentially, and ashram is something which is meant for, as Srila Prabhupada described in the verse that we read, a path of self-realization. So both the varna and ashram are interrelated, and they're actually dependent on one another, because we, the conditioned souls, are basically bound. A guna means rope, so we're bound, we're prisoners of matter, and we have to break free of those ropes means to become self-realized and get the ultimate aim of life. So the main purpose of ashram, the ashrama, the dharma associated with ashrama, all the things that Bhishma Dev described, the main purpose is to awaken knowledge and detachment. This is what Srila Prabhupada called counteraction. Basically, the idea is that the ashrams, brahmachari ashram, grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, sannyasa ashram, they have qualities of varying levels of renunciation and enjoyment. And so this is what Srila Prabhupada described in the prior verses as Bhishma Dev calls it detachment or attachment. So the brahmachari ashram, Srila Prabhupada mentions this, is training ground for jivas. It is the ashram in which one practices detachment, in that the brahmachari means that the world is not the actual home for a living. And one who cannot have this mood of detachment, then they're allowed to enter into grihastha or family life, albeit with some regulation for enjoyment. So that's why ashramas are described as having qualities of renunciation and enjoyment, which manifest as detachment or attachment. So household life is for one who's attached. Brahmachari life is for one who's trying to cultivate detachment. And ultimately, when after progressing in brahmachari or grihastha ashram, one can, or by natural inclination, one who's ultimately detached can go forward to vanaprastha and sannyasa ashram, where one lives in a renounced manner, only, so you're not working and you're not trying to accumulate wealth, just trying to keep the body and soul fit for self-realization. So the ashram dharma is basically describing a path of self-realization, going from detachment as brahmachari to attachment as grihastha to ultimate detachment. Now, it is true that acharyas say that one does not have to go linearly or step by step. One can go direct from brahmachari to sannyasa ashram. And we see that in the example of many spiritual masters, etc. So, okay, so that's describing ashram. Well, what about the varnas? So here is, so take home point. Ashrams are based on attachment and detachment. Attachment and detachment. Or renunciation and enjoyment is the other way to think of it. Varna is based on guna. So please understand, varna is based on guna, ashram is based on attachment and detachment, or renunciation or enjoyment. So here Lord Krishna is saying, I've created the four varnas according to guna and the subsequent activity. So the brahmanas, what guna does a brahman have? Anybody know? What mode of nature are they under?
Sattvic.
Yes. Yes. So, and as you know, Ravi Prabhu, from reading Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that there's an interplay between the modes, and we can see that in our own lives. Sometimes we're more in the mode, and sometimes we may be more in the mode of passion, right? Like I have to get a bigger job, I have to get a bigger house, whatever. I have to have so-and-so as my spouse. So even though one may be sattvic, sometimes something else comes in. But Brahmanas generally are predominated by sattvic, like you said. So they perform activities because they have that guna, and their karmic, their karma, meaning their activity, are things consistent with that guna, such as mind control, self-control, etc. The Kshatriyas are predominated by combination of rajas, which is mode of passion, and sattva, both. They have both. They're not just, a lot of devotees think it's just purely rajas, but it's not, according to our acharyas. So they perform, if it was just passion, then they would be like kind of like the current rulership of the world, current government. In Vedic tradition, it's, rajas and sattva. So they perform actions such as heroic activities or engage in warfare for the purpose of protection of their population. And the Vaishyas are, their guna is combination of rajas and tamas, not just tamas, but rajas and tamas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. So because their subsequent karma, their activity, is farming and raising cows. And then the Shudras, they're predominated by tamas, mode of ignorance, so their duty or their activity is to serve others. So that's the point that this verse is describing. So just remember again, it's important because in Kali Yuga, our memories are not strong, that that the ashram is controlled by attachment, detachment, propensity, and the varna is controlled by the guna, rajas, and sattvic, rajas, tamas. Okay, so why did Krishna create this? Because on a practical level, different people are good at different things, right? Somebody may be a really good computer programmer, somebody may be a really good cook, like that. So Varnashram provides people with occupations or vocation that is suitable for this specific strength. And that's why you see that even in a degraded form throughout the world nowadays. So thus enabling people to maximize their contribution to society so that there's well-being for the individual as well as for society. Now, I have a question for you. Why does Krishna say, although I'm the creator of the system, you should know that I'm yet the non-doer, being unchangeable? Does anybody understand that? How do you understand that? I think you all are very capable in Gita from the way you have discussed. Any thoughts? I mean that I'm the creator, but I'm the non-doer.
So basically, since maybe Krishna's explaining here that like the king Prabhu, he's the lawmaker, but he's above the law. Simply, he doesn't have anything to do with material, because I think the 4th chapter Krishna also mentions that he doesn't have nothing. There's nothing he wants, nothing he needs to obtain, and he's just doing his duty just because so that other people can follow or the right path.
Yes, that is one way that he's a non-doer. The other, thank you very much. The other way is that in the context of this verse, what he's saying is he's not the doer, means that he doesn't put people into the Brahman ashram or the Shuddha ashram. It's based on their guna and karma. So in that way, it kind of goes with the yeyatha man papadyante tam satayeva bhajami mam Amavartma Anuvartante Rishya Partha Sarvasya, 4.13, that Krishna is not being partial. Like you said, he's the lawmaker, but he's not administering the law specifically and uniquely. So, but he's reciprocating. That's why ye yatamam prapadyante. So, specifically in this concept, in this context of this verse, he's a non-doer in the sense that he is not. It's not him who's determining whether we're in ashram A or ashram B or varna A, varna B. It's us that do it based on our conditioning. And so this is I just tried to provide an overview of what does ashram and all this mean, varna and ashram in these two verses. So I wanted to, in the time that was allocated till 9, I wanted to, let me just see, it's 8:45. I wanted to explore this Raja Dharma. Reading Canto 1, I was profoundly impressed by some of the comments Srila Prabhupada makes about Raja Dharma, especially looking at the current political upheaval throughout the world. So I wanted to kind of explore that, if I may. So, and this is described later on in Canto 1 in Chapter 12, Chapter 13. Chapter 12 is the birth of Emperor Maharaj. And there's some pretty amazing things that are commented on in this chapter. So this is a description of saintly kings. Because Srila Prabhupada says in the verse we just read that Raja Dharma is a great science. Unlike modern diplomacy for political supremacy, the kings were trained systematically to become munificent and not merely tax collectors. So here, Shisuta Vacha Apirpala Dharma Raja Pitrivid Ranjana Prajaha. Srila Prabhupada mentioned this word Prajaha in the current verse that we read. Well, this is where that's referencing to. Nihishpraha Sarva Kamebhya Krishna Padu Anusevaya. Sri Sutta Goswami said, Emperor Yudhishthira administered generously to everyone during. He was exactly like his father. He had no personal ambition and was freed from all sorts of sense gratification because of his continuous service unto the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada mentions here that the word prajaha is significant. It comes from the word mean that which is born. So the idea is that on this earth, as well as in other planets, there are many species of life, going all the way from human beings to animals that live in the ocean to those with covered consciousness like the plants and the trees. They're all known as prajas. So that's why Brahmaji is sometimes called Prajapati. So the king represents, the idea here is that the Raja Dharma is that the king represents all living beings, not just human beings, but plants, trees, etc. That's where, and so representing them in one way as, the prajas, that's why this says here, that he was exactly like his father, so kind of like the father of all living beings. But in the other hand, the king also is actually the direct representative of the Supreme Lord. So his dharma is to give proper protection to every one of the prajas. And Srila Prabhupada goes on in this purport to talk about how the current system of governance is not consistent with this, where you're the governor, not just of the Democrats or the Republicans or the human beings, you're governor of every. And elsewhere he says in Bhagavatam Canto 1 that the cows are also the citizens of the country, not just human beings. And it's a king's duty, his dharma, to protect all the citizens, including cows and goats and pigs, whatever. So Maharaj Yudhishthira, this verse is speaking about how Maharaj Yudhishthira understood this. Why? By continuous service unto the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. Continuous service, and this is called Krishna Pada Anusevaya. By doing that, he obtained the qualification of administrating governance. And the Prabhupada. So you have to know the science of being a devotee of the Lord, and that's part of the problem these days. That the way people come into governance is they go to school, become business people, or become lawyers, or whatever, doctors, etc., computer programmers. They become good at what they do, and then they naturally, because of personal desire, they go on and start becoming governors and all this, but they haven't learned the science of love of God. They haven't learned that they're the representatives of God, and they're supposed to take care of all the projects. So because of that, there's the challenge. So there's a science behind this, but nobody understands the science in governance. So, because by knowing the science of Bhakti Yoga, one develops the qualities of sattva, becoming, because Krishna is pure Vishuddha sattva, above any mode of nature, purified goodness. And so one who comes in contact with him, then that person will also develop goodness. And therefore they won't have this personal ambition. And that's why it talks about Maharaj Yudhishthira is freed from all sorts of sense gratification because of his continuous service to the Lord. Includes, of course, the service to the Lord's creation, all the prajas who form the complete whole in this universe. So that's a very wonderful explanation by Srila Prabhupada on this description of Raja Dharma, and I want to show a couple of other sections there. So here's another one, just to give you a flavor. In this chapter 13, which is Dhritarashtra quits home after the birth of Maharaj Parikshit, it talks about how Vidur comes back to Hastinapur and they celebrate him, and then Vidur speaks some strong things to Dhritarashtra. So, evam griheshu saktanam paramatmanam tad aktayat karmad avijnata kala param dushtaraha. Insurmountable internal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and always engrossed in their thoughts. So, that's why Srila Prabhupada says that being in a particular varna is not a license. Yes, varnas are based on attachment and detachment and therefore enjoyment and renunciation, but it's regulated. So the whole idea is that one's life duration is limited, and we cannot extend it beyond a certain time based on our whatever is destined for us. And so as a human being, such time should be very carefully spent because we cannot regain time. So the idea is one can become engrossed in a varna, Raja Dharma or Stri Dharma or whatever, one of those things, Vaishya Dharma, not understanding that one's life is being decreasing within this body, and we're still not coming up with to our big problem, which are death, disease, birth, old age. So the idea is that we can ultimately because the living jiva is eternal and cannot be happy in a material situation, ultimately. So one has to come to a better solution where one can be happy, and that is to return to spiritual world, because any that we have will not give us eternal life. And if we understand that, that's what the point is being made here by Vidur, that Dhritarashtra, you cannot just get this material happiness will not be resulting in spiritual happiness. So, and that somebody who's actually hungry for eternal spiritual happiness cannot find that solution through the process of material happiness. So, this is kind of talking about something where a sense of materialism, centers on trying to obtain something that's outside of us, something external. We were talking about the discussion on chapter 5, that verse which says, one who has happiness within, who's active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He's liberated and supreme, and ultimately he attains the supreme. This is this comment on Brahma Bhuta, Brahma Nirvana on chapter 5. So we're discussing this on Friday. So materialism centered external, something which actually has no intrinsic connection with our eternal soul. Yes, we need material things to take care of, family and ourselves. We need a shelter, we need clothing, we need food. But, it's okay to have necessities, but the idea is not to pursue everything that's desirable, because ultimately, external to our internal nature is going to go. The house will collapse, the car will rust, etc. The kids will grow up and leave and have their own families, etc. So that's in contrast to spirituality, where it's more of it centers not on gaining something external, but in regaining something internal. That's why Srila Prabhupada, when he first came to the US, his first speech, he said, I've not come here to give you something new. I've come here to remind you of what you have forgotten. This is from Chaitanya Charitamrita. So as the love between a jiva and Krishna is internal, it's intrinsic to us, it's our nature. It can not go, it won't go away. It won't decay by time, unless if we allow it to forget. Yeah. So that was my comments on this idea of Raja Dharma. That's what I found it when I was reading these sections on Canto 12, chapter 12 and 13. Very wonderful how Srila Prabhupada described governance and what ideal governance is. So after this, Bhishma Dev, comes back into this idea of Bhagavad Dharman, Bhagavad Dharman, the act of devotees, which Srila Prabhupada called also the salvation aspect. So this kind of talks about, what is, yes, there's Raja Dharma, yes, there's Tri Dharma, etc., but we know what ultimate Dharma is, Savai Pumsham Paro Dharma. So the idea is that Shuta Goswami, when he's describing this to the sages at Namashranya, he says, Dharma Swanishtaha Pumsam Vishwakshena Katashaya Nat Upayad Yadhi Ratim Shama Eva Hi Kevalam. Occupational activities, the dharma, that a man performs according to his own, their varna and their ashram, are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of personality of Godhead. So Bhishma Dev is concluding Dharma discussion by describing the most important point. And Srila Prabhupada, in the verse we had read, the verse of focus this week, calls it the process of pleasing the Lord. So why is it that dharma in the form of varnashram is not considered dharma? Why is that? Because this verse states that that's because being brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra in itself, that doesn't produce an attraction for, ratim, message, attraction for the message of God. So it's not complete. There has to be that attraction. So it says all other dharmas other than that's vaipum samparo dharma, even if they're done without attachment and they don't produce ratim, then they're considered useless labor, shramam evahi kevalam. And then, Sutta Goswami in the same section talks about that. Trying to get at this idea of pleasing the Lord by our occupation, by our activities. That's why I'm focusing on this. So, ata pumbhir dvija shrista varnashram vibhagashaha swanishtata sasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. The samsiddhir haritoshanam is frequently quoted. O best among the twice-born, is therefore concluded that the highest perfection one can achieve by discharging the duties prescribed for one's own occupation according to caste divisions and orders of life is to please the personality of Godhead. So, Srila Prabhupada in the purport to this verse says the highest perfection is of Varnashram Dharma is to cooperate jointly for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. So, the idea is when the goal of our life is directed towards our own selfish desire, that can also creep in devotional life. This, idea of I have such and such position, I'm temple president, I'm manager, I'm pujari, I'm the head this, I'm a preacher, I'm a Sankirtan leader, etc. Then sometimes we can get under this influence of not hesitating how others satisfy our own desires. And sometimes, as we can see in the form of the degraded varnashram in India, we can exploit those that are weaker, like cows, women, etc. So the idea is we have to reconnect with this idea of pleasing, samsiddhir haritoshanam. Srila Prabhupada in one lecture in Mayapur talks about how, like the communists, they try to make everybody one, but they fail. Yet, but even though they say everything is one, there's, like you can see this in China and in Russia, there's the managers and there's the laborers. So, but they're the same people who kind of criticize the varnashram system. So Srila Prabhupada said, well, you're making two divisions. You're saying there's a laborer and there's a manager. So instead of two, if Lord Krishna says Chatu Varnam, he says four, what's the difference? So, how can you nullify? That's why I said in the very beginning that this Chatu Varnam is created because it's created by Lord Krishna. It is eternal. It cannot go away. It's either in an elevated form or it's in a degraded form. So, and that division is there because it's by the will of Krishna. Why? Why is that system there? For samsiddhir haritoshanam, to try to satisfy Krishna. So Prabhupada makes a point. That's oneness, not this, okay, everything is one in terms of division of labor, but oneness in terms of samsiddhir haritoshanam. And Srila Prabhupada goes on in that lecture to describe how Arjuna's duty was to fight, and the perfection of his fighting, he uses this statement in Bhagavad Gita, the perfection of his fighting was tested by his desire to satisfy Krishna. meaning Krishna wanted Arjun to fight, right? He says that in the end of chapter 4. And when he fought for the satisfaction of Lord, then that was perfection of Arjun's varnashram. But when he did not, then that was not so wonderful. So here's a practical thing for us. Whatever our varna, whatever ashram, whatever position we're in, whether we're father or mother or new father for new boy, our accomplishment is to samsiddhir haritoshana. Is Krishna pleased? Is Krishna satisfied with the effort? And Krishna tells us, how to do this. In another lecture where Srila Prabhupada speaks, he says, if I don't know somebody and somebody says, go to so-and-so and satisfy so-and-so, how will I do it if I don't know him? What are his likes? What are his dislikes? So he says through Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam that we know who God is, where he lives, what he does, his name, his father's name, everything. Unlike other practices, we know. So the service of satisfying samsiddhir haritoshanam is possible for us because we know what God likes. Not that some vague idea, but exactly. And how do we know this? We know this through, the authority of Shastra, Sadhu, and Guru. Right? So Krishna gives the formula, right? It's right here in Gita. He says, Man mana bhav mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskru mam vivasasi satyam te pratigani. So he gives the formula for how to get samsiddhir haritoshanam. That always think of him, man mana bhav mad bhakto. If you want to satisfy it, then what can I, it's like Srila Prabhupada was saying to his disciples, you'll come to me and say, Prabhupada, what can I do for you? And if Prabhupada says, if you do such and such, I'll be satisfied. So here, likewise, same thing is occurring where Sutta Goswami is saying samsiddhir haritoshanam. And so how can we satisfy Krishna? We can satisfy him by man mana bhadma bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Right? So that's the ultimate goal of the varnashram dharam, to have samsiddhir haritoshanam. I know I went late in this, but I found so much to speak on this. And I didn't even cover all the other things that, like, for example, Stri Dharma, I didn't even cover that. And I can speak a little bit about that if somebody desires to hear that. Okay, questions, comments on the topic for today or anything else?
Prabhuji, one question I have is when obviously
Yes.
Bhishma knows so much, but
Yes.
still why Duryodhan is the way he is and why he was not controlled and why all these things happen. I mean, even in today's world, it's very, at least for me, it's very inconceivable to think of something that happened to Draupadi, and especially, it's like your cousin's wife and things like that, right? I mean, so it's so, at least it sounds very brutal to me, right? And especially when so many elders are there in that same place, why they could not, why did they make it happen? I mean,
right. I think, yes, very nice question. Why did, I'll just make it, rather than they, I'll just say Bhishma Dev, okay? So a question that's being asked is, why did Bhishma Dev not do more to curtail what the Kauravas were doing, in essence, right?
Yes, probably.
Okay, does anybody have a response to this very nice question? Okay, so one way that Srila Prabhupada sometimes will explain it, Ravi Prabhu, is that Bhishma Dev was, so-called being maintained by the Kauravas. Kauravas are king, and so he was being maintained financially, a place to stay, place to eat, etc. Right? You've heard that explanation before, correct, Ravi Prabhu? And therefore
Yes.
he was beholding. Yeah, therefore he was beholding. If I come into your house, Ravi Prabhu, and I'm not working or anything, then essentially, you're maintaining me. And that's kind of like what Vidur's argument for Dhritarashtra to leave. He tried to, Vidur, Srila Prabhupada says it beautifully in chapter 13. Vidur, one can go into Vanaprastha ashram naturally because of one's detachment and renunciation, or one can be, but the job sometimes of a spiritual master is to push one into a particular situation, and that's what Vidur did. So Vidur used that argument for Dhritarashtra, that you're being maintained, and why are you doing this? You're living like as a beggar in this palace. Explanation that I like, coming from Mahabharata, is that Bhishma Dev, as you know, had sworn that he will have no children. Correct, Ravi Prabhu?
Correct.
To his stepmother's mother, right? When
Right.
Shantanu had attraction for this lady, who was actually amongst the people who worked as fishermen, the father of that lady said, you're going to produce children. I don't want my daughter to be married to your father, because ultimately you're going to be having kids, right? So Bhishma took this vow, and that's why he's called Bhishma, because of this incredible vow that I won't have children, right? So what did the father of that lady say next to Bhishma Dev? Do you remember?
I'm not sure, probably.
Okay, so he said that yes, you can be celibate and not have children, but when my grandkids come into position, you're making a promise to your father of this, but how does your promise carry forward to the grandchildren? So Bhishma Dev at that time he made this promise that whoever is the ruler of Hastinapur, I will support them completely. So he was bound by that promise that he had made to his stepmother's father. Just like he had made the initial promise that I won't have children, he made a second promise that most people don't remember hearing from Mahabharata, that I will support whoever is the ruler of Hastinapur, no matter what. And that's why Mahabharata explains in this chapter of Bhishma Dev passing away, it explains that this is the reason Bhishma Dev did this. So on a material plane, Ravi Prabhu, that's the explanation. On a spiritual plane, one can think of Kurukshetra as a battlefield where the Pandavas and the Kauravas fought to get supremacy of who's going to be the ruler. But Kurukshetra is also a place where Bhishma Dev is able to reciprocate with Lord Krishna, and Lord Krishna is able to reciprocate with Bhishma Dev. The entire, in one level, the battle is there for Arjuna to gain and Pandavas to become princes and rulers. On another level, the battle is there simply for Bhishma Dev and Lord Krishna to exchange in love, where Bhishma Dev's goal was to show that Lord Krishna will break his vow to protect his devotee. And Lord Krishna's desire was to reciprocate with Bhishma Dev in a mood of deep appreciation for his total surrender to his father's wishes and his purity. So that's the way I understand it, Ravi Prabhu, that Bhishma Dev on a practical level promised his stepmother's father that he will support totally, regardless of the situation, whoever is the ruler. Just like Bhishma, they refused to engage in marriage, and therefore was in a battle with Parusharam, and he was the only individual who was ever able to hold Parusharam to like a standstill situation. And so Parusharam had engaged in battle with Lord Ram, as you know as well. And so Parusharam granted Bhishma Dev that because you can do this, you're the greatest warrior in this world. Nobody will be able to defeat you unless if you desire it. So I think the argument that Bhishma Dev was just being maintained by Dhritarashtra is not really not completely. Yes, in one way he was, but he was inestimably competent to go, gain a kingdom on his own. But he had made promises to his stepmother's father that he couldn't break. So that's one way to think of it. The other way to think of it also, Ravi Prabhu, is that ultimately that situation created a situation where Bhishma Dev was able to have this rasa that he had with Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna honored that desire of Bhishma Dev, and he did it, where he took up the wheel and charged at Bhishma Dev. And so as soon as Bhishma Dev saw Lord Krishna, Bhishma Dev immediately coming at him, Bhishma Dev stopped, shooting arrows at the Lord. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji. That helps quite a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you very much for joining. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Thank you for the very nice class.
Thank you, Prabhupada Prabhu, for joining.